Hello, everybody. How are we doing post race in Spain? And it was an interesting Spanish Grand Prix. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought there was going to be a bit more drama, and then in the end, it just kind of played out how we expected it to, especially after the opening few laps. But generally speaking, again, second year without the chicane, Taron. How did you feel about Spain?
I felt like compared to Spain of old, it was good. However, I do think that it very much summed up how I feel like a lot of this season after the first sort of 4 or 5 races
Mhm.
feels as a whole, which is
Yes.
where you're looking at everything and going, that there's stuff that can be happening here. There's people catching people and there's stuff that could happen even at the top of the field, and then it just didn't quite materialize.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how I would sum it up, like and if I think even about, like, sort of further down the order, we obviously had that really great battle between Norris and Russell, um, but even when other people were making moves, it was sort of, like, a little bit one and done, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like, they cruise get to the back, get by in some places, not all the time, obviously, but overall, it was sort of good, but, like, it had more potential,
Yeah, it was one of those things.
I think
It
is the
was it felt very Imola. You know when Imola kind of ended and it was like, oh,
Mhm,
if Imola was 5 laps longer, that would have been a really good end to the race. It felt like a similar kind of
yeah.
vibe. It was like Formula One is just a bit too short like, in terms of the laps completed throughout the Grand Prix, which seems strange. Like, surely they think through this. And obviously,
Yeah.
the teams plan that in terms of their tyre strategies and their fuel load and bits and pieces. But I don't know. Can we just elongate it a little bit? Is that allowed? Maybe like halfway through. Like, there's a battle, sort of a couple of laps in the brewing. The technical like team can just be like, you know what? Let's just add 5 laps to this Grand Prix.
It's almost a little bit like, the whole phrase about how catching one thing and like passing is another.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that.
in those scenarios, it's very much a case of you can plan it out and be like, right, you're going to catch him with like 1 or 2 laps to go, and everyone's like, oh, it's going to be so amazing. Like he might get there with 1 or 2 laps to go. But the reality is, with how close the cars are on pace and how good the drivers are, you then need a couple of laps to actually
Yeah,
make that overtake. I
yeah,
feel like a good example would be like Leclerc catching Russell at the end of this one,
yeah, yeah,
where he got really close to him, but it was like you still need that little bit just to get by. And obviously, at the end of the race, the car in front is like, okay, I've only got to manage till the end of this lap. Like it doesn't matter. But I do get what you mean. It always seems to be the case where you're like, oh, it's close. They're getting there. They're getting there. And then it just doesn't quite materialize.
yeah. I think Charles Leclerc was the one, wasn't he? Finished what, like 4 tenths behind George Russell in the end. But let's quickly
Yeah.
run down the order just in case people missed it. Lando Norris took pole position. I was so ready for a Lando Norris second victory. There was Max Verstappen again. It's just, what is it? He's got like a 67% win percentage in the last 3 seasons or something. It is abysmal in terms of the win percentage that Max Verstappen has. But getting closer, getting closer. Max Verstappen did take the victory. Lando Norris just behind. Lewis Hamilton picked up his
Mm.
18 seasons in a row now. Lewis Hamilton has picked up a podium, which is absolutely mental. Obviously, he lost the victory streak, but the podium streak lives on, which I think he won't be that concerned about, but it's something to talk about. George Russell came in fourth place, Charles Leclerc in fifth, Carlos Sainz in sixth, but the civil war at Ferrari is very much starting to heat up. Oscar Piastri came home in seventh place. A weird one for Oscar Piastri. I'll delve into it a little bit later. Sergio Perez, eighth place in a Red Bull, and a new contract in his back pocket is really interesting to see how that will develop. Pierre Gasly and
I
Esteban
mean, that's a good
Ocon.
result after the last few.
Oh, I don't even know. Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, though, managed to both get in the points for Alpine. Nico Hulkenberg, the man who is always 11th, is ridiculous at this point. 5 in the last 7 races, he has been 11th place. That is
Wow.
agonizing for any Haas fans. Fernando Alonso came home in 12th, Zhou Guanyu 13th, Lance Stroll in 14th, Daniel Ricciardo in 15th, and then just does it matter from there? Valtteri Bottas, 16th place, Kevin Magnussen, Alex Albon, Yuki Tsunoda, and Logan Sargent in the same Williams car as Alex Albon. They are finally on parity, and it was a pretty poor parity between the two Williamses over the weekend. Just of those results, Taryn, which one was the like most surprising to you coming into the Spanish Grand Prix weekend?
Coming into it or after the start of the race?
That's very true, yeah.
I think there's a couple for me, I think that stand out. And I'll actually say my biggest, like, disappointing one when I
Oh,
look at it, I'm actually gonna go with, like, Aston Martin.
oh yeah.
I don't know if this is like, don't get me wrong, you look at it and you go, "Okay, it's not great from Perez," and maybe you go, "Yeah, Piastri's a little bit further down, didn't have great qualifying." But when I look at the results and I go, Aston Martin are in 12th and 14th, having been beaten by both Alpine cars. And I just like I just look at it and go, it's just going all wrong. I mean, that's my personal just it just looks bad how it is.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of the other ones, as I say, like a Perez or a Piastri, are like they're not great, but it's not like a disaster. But I feel like there's more to where Alonso and Stroll are in the grand scheme of just going backwards.
I think
I would
that's the
say.
thing with Aston Martin, isn't it, at the moment? Especially, like, I know that it's Fernando Alonso's home Grand Prix. There was loads of Aston Martin merch on display, but yeah, the fact that he just petered to a 12th place finish, and where he was last year in comparison to this year, like we
Mm,
talked about Aston Martin last year starting really well and not being able to kind of keep pace with those top teams. I think that's just been exacerbated by a winter break and then coming into a new season where, again, those top four teams have just escaped away from Aston Martin.
yeah.
Like they've just completely left them for dead. And Fernando Alonso, okay, he's probably going to finish ninth in the championship because he's put in some solid performances at the beginning of the year, but he's looking further and further away from that top eight.
Do you know what it's kind of like? Do you remember 2022 and Valtteri Bottas, where
Yes,
he had a couple of good results in the
great start.
Sauber
Yeah.
at the start of the year, and then just held on to that for the rest? And Alonso's kind of on like similar points to where he
Hmm.
was.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's also a case with them. When you look back to last year, it was sort of like you have the second fastest car, and you've sort of fallen down the order. By the end of the season, they were kind of like fourth or fifth
Yeah.
fastest ish, around that range. And then this year, you're like you started off as the fourth or fifth fastest car, um, and now you're falling back from there as well. So I don't know. I mean, to me, it just sort of sums up. Like if you say to me which team is most disappointing at the moment, it's probably them.
Yeah.
I think
No,
that's
I can definitely see that. I can definitely see that. It's
just the only
just
way I can sort of sum it up.
well, as you say, like it's one of those things where you just I don't know, maybe I expected more from Aston Martin. I feel like I really got on the kind of early 2023 hype where it was like they've got their wind tunnel, they've got their factory, they've got like everything coming together. And it was like, yeah, this is going to be Aston Martin in the mix. And then it just did.
Maybe it's all a grand plan to get Adrian Newey, where they're basically like, so we've got a project for you. You know, we've got something for you to work on and improve. Whereas you don't want to go to Ferrari; they've already got a decent car. You don't want to go to McLaren; they've already got a pretty good car. You want to come somewhere where you can really build up from the bottom, and that's us, Aston Martin. But yeah, I think it's just summed up. I think for me by the fact that they were comfortably beaten by both Alpines, and considering where Alpine were to start the year
Yeah.
as well. Like even just as I said in the last, how many races in are we now? 9, 10?
10. Yeah.
Even yeah, even just in those, that it's just I don't know. It's hard to see where it's going to turn around.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely ebbed away as the season has progressed. But let's kind of go down the order and have a little chat about the main talking points. Max Verstappen
Hmm.
taking the victory. Feel like we should start with him in one way or another. It was another display from Max Verstappen where I almost felt like it was a little bit of a reminder that Max Verstappen is very good. Like I feel like we've kind of got to the point where he was so dominant last season and the wins came so easily that we'd half forgotten Max Verstappen is in this situation for a reason. Like he is a very, very good driver. And when push came to shove, when he needed to put in those lap times, he did. And similarly, Red Bull are the team where they are for a reason. They got all the pit stops right. All of their pit stops were quicker. So Max Verstappen finished the race 2.2 seconds ahead of Norris, and Max Verstappen's pit stops were in total 1.3 seconds quicker. So he's gained a second and a half just in the pit stops, just by the fact that the team got the tyres on and off quicker than the McLaren team did. And that's where Red
It
Bull, for
kind of
me, just still are a tier above the rest.
it it's kind of summed up in a way if I were to say that Red Bull, including Max Verstappen, just know how to win,
Yeah.
and they just know how to get the result. I feel like that's the difference between when you look at McLaren and Lando Norris. Like, yes, Lando Norris has won his race, and yes, Ricciardo got a win a few years ago. But generally, McLaren in recent years don't have that. This is how we win this race. This is what we do. This is how we get the result. Whereas Red Bull are effectively, the word is just, they're just clinical.
Yeah.
It's so rare that we ever see a race. I mean, obviously, it's helped how good Max and the car have been, but it's so rare that we see a race and go, yeah, they made a mistake there. They messed up there. That went wrong. I can only think of a handful where, for example, do you remember the USA a couple of years ago? They had
Mhm.
like a massively long, was it last year even? Yeah, they had a massively long pit stop, and Verstappen was chasing down Hamilton and Norris. And even then, it's like, because of the car, they managed to get through and win it. But it's so rare that we see any sort of mistakes
Yes.
that cost them wins. Whereas I feel like in this one, on the flip side, if you go to say Lando Norris, not necessarily, well, it is mistakes. It's not like egregious errors, but you can very much in this race see, well, if they hadn't done this, or this was different, or this had changed, the result very easily could have been different. And they were all generally avoidable things, I would say, for Lando Norris in this one. And that's where Red Bull, they just tend not to do them.
Yeah. And I think Max Verstappen kind of put it best himself when he said after the race, he was like, it was that first stint that really made it count. Like, they just, to an extent, executed it perfectly. I know that he ended up behind George Russell for a lap at the beginning, but then took back the lead of the Grand Prix. And it was just that kind of clinical Max Verstappen, took the lead of the Grand Prix, elongated enough of a lead so that he could pit perfectly. And I remember him coming out, I think it was around 6.5, 7 seconds behind Oscar Piastri, and on a fresh set of medium tyres. And it was like, okay, he's just got 7 seconds to now run into. And that's really not what you want if you're a McLaren or a Ferrari. You don't want Max Verstappen with road in front of him, because if there's road in front of him, like, he very quickly caught the back of Oscar Piastri and just made light work of him. Because as soon as you put 6, 7 seconds of track in front of Verstappen, he eats that up. And it was that stint for me that just really made the difference. And again, just showed Max Verstappen is still a stunningly quick driver. And it's not just about producing a car that is quicker than Red Bull. It's also about having a driver in your car that is on parity with Max Verstappen. And there's not many on the grid that can get anywhere close to him on his day. Like, he did just put together another really solid drive.
And we've seen as well, even if say you think back to like 2021, the year where, like, in the year of Verstappen titles had the closest competition, the amount of times, like, we saw in that year, for example, how difficult it was, even if you had a slightly quicker car, to get by Verstappen once he was in the lead.
Mhm.
He's like, one of the things I think that's a bit never really talked about. So everyone talks about how quick Max is and how ruthless he can be overtaking. I think one of the things with him is how just almost impossible he is to get by.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of times in more recent years, I think, because obviously he knows the car's really great. I don't need to fight this right now. However, in general, even if you look at, I would still say, even if there were 10 more laps, I would still have said Verstappen wins that race, because personally, I just don't think on the same set of tires, regardless of slightly newer or whatever, I don't think you would have been able to get past him, especially at a track like Spain, where realistically there's only one place you can get by.
Yeah.
And I think that's that level that Verstappen has, where sure, you might be able to match him on pace, you might be able to get pole and out qualify him, but at the end of the day, if he gets himself into first place either through strategy or through overtakes, it's near impossible to try and then get back past without help.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like, we can talk about Lando Norris now and how he was upset after the Grand Prix. And I think he had a right to be upset. But as you say, Max Verstappen just in that first phase, and it was literally what, like the run down to the first corner, Lando Norris tries to cover off Max Verstappen as much as possible. But in the end, loses out to Max and George Russell. And I think the George Russell thing is the bigger one for me.
Yes.
Opening that door, letting George Russell in front, and we saw Max Verstappen got back in front of George Russell, whereas Lando just kind of got stuck behind the Mercedes for a little bit too long. And that, again, is, you talk about 2 seconds, the gap. It's those seconds lost behind the Mercedes
lost 5,
as well.
6 seconds or so.
Yeah, and he probably did have the pace to keep up with a Verstappen if George Russell hadn't been there. And I know George Russell wanted to try and win the race himself, but if George Russell would have kind of got out of the way, maybe we would have seen Norris and Verstappen even have to actually have a battle with one another.
I get the sense that if Norris was on if Norris was behind Verstappen kind of from the beginning, the races we've seen in the past, like the one that springs to mind is 2021 Hamilton Verstappen, where it's like they're both super quick, but you've got to do something with the strategy. You've got to do something else clever to just get that extra edge. I feel like that's the kind of race it would have been on for. But just looking back to Lando, and you mentioned obviously the start, and not to really like punch him when he's down, but at what point do we kind of start to go, okay, this is a trend now? Because I saw a tweet on this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously, as you know, everything you see on the internet is obviously true. But it was that I believe Lando's got 3 poles, and in all 3 times, in both sprints and races, and all 3 times he's lost the lead by turn 1.
Really? I did not know that. I mean, maybe.
And I'm not 100%. I know for sure. Or maybe turn 1 or turn 2. China was the other one in the sprint. This one, and I can't remember the third off the top of my head.
It would have been Russia 2021. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was Carlos Sainz.
No, I thought I meant this year.
Just this year. Sorry, I'm going all the way back.
Oh, I don't know, but it might even be. But you get the point. And I do feel like we sort of seen it a couple of times, and I don't know if it's just I don't know. I was gonna say like a lack of start experience, but it's not, because it's like he's been here for so long. He's started in the front row a number of times, but I do feel a little bit like we've seen it a bit too. Like if you notice it now,
yes,
it's not like you go, Verstappen got him this time, or whoever's alongside him got him this time. Now it's like you think back to China, and it was like you kind of messed up a bit and made a mistake there. You think back to this one, it's like you didn't get away well enough, and that cost you.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that really cost you in terms of the win. And I do feel like we're sort of at that point. Like we had this discussion a little bit a while ago about Norris in qualifying.
Yeah.
Where like we've had this discussion before about at what point do you sort of go, is he just kind of making a few more mistakes than people want to admit to? And I feel like that's tidied up. Hence now he's getting poles, front rows because of that. But now it's going on to, okay, you've got those, but you've got to tidy up the race starts. Because they really do cost you, especially when you don't have the quickest car necessarily or outright. They do cost you. And I just feel like in this one, when it happens, you're just sort of like, it's not that it was inevitable, but it almost felt a bit like, well, I saw that one coming kind of thing.
No, I completely agree. I think you make a great point in that there are so many facets to being a good racing driver. And as you say, you can get rid of one little error. It was that qualifying last year. Think back to Qatar and Mexico and so many others towards the end of the last season where it was like, Lando should have been on pole there. That should have been like, considering the pace that he had through Q1, through Q2, moving into Q3, it was like, should have been pole, and wasn't. Now he did, like, put in an absolutely ridiculous lap to get that pole position. But as you say, I think he almost overthought it. I think he saw that it was Max Verstappen beside him. I think he saw Max Verstappen get a good start. And Well, you could see that he only had eyes for Max Verstappen, right? He was drifting over to the right-hand side of the track, basically before
Yeah.
they'd even got going. Like, Lando Norris was pointing in Max Verstappen's direction, knowing that he was going to have to try and cover him off. Whereas Verstappen just kind of drove his line to that first corner.
Mm.
And then, yeah, it was the fact that he got so distracted by Max Verstappen that also let George Russell through. And it's that thing that McLaren are missing, that little bit of execution. As you say, Lando Norris with a couple of little errors. Then you could also point at the pit stops. I thought it was interesting that they did change up the strategy and seemed to make it work.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was a
Well-
positive that they could take. The fact that they were like, okay, let's try something different. And Lando Norris is good enough on his tyres now to be like, okay, I'm going to do a different strategy, going to hold on to them in a slightly different window and do this instead. But I suppose that also came with the fact that the McLaren was faster, so they could switch up the strategy and still have the benefit of the faster car on the medium compound tyre.
I feel like as well, we're at Spain, we've been at, or Barcelona, I should say, enough, and it's so well known that they know if you just do the same as the car around you,
Yeah.
you're not going to get past them. Unless you manage to pull off the undercut, if you pit a lap or two after them, you're just not going to be able to get by at a track like Spain. Especially when the cars aren't so far apart in pace and they're quite similar. And that's where, I think they made the right call to do something different. But I'd argue like the damage was already done.
Yes. Yeah.
Like in reality, you Verstappen already at that point had a sort of 5-6 second net lead. You then take into account a slightly slower pit stop, and it's sort of like 7 to 8 seconds kind of range, and it's just that bit too much. So yeah, definitely the right thing to do. And you have to admire like his confidence when, I don't know if you heard the radio clip where is it Will, his engineer, was on the radio and was like, "Can you overtake Hamilton?" He's like, "Yeah, I do that.
Yeah.
No problem." Which, to be fair, everything worked out fine. They actually came out ahead of Russell, didn't he, on the second stint?
Yeah,
But,
he did. That was the thing, right? Like,
yeah, like
I did, as you say, I like the fact that Lando does back himself. Like, he's got that bit of confidence. I just think maybe he backs himself against, which is kind of weird, right? Like, he backed himself to get past Lewis Hamilton. But I suppose it's not the Lewis Hamilton of 5 years ago. You know what I mean? Like,
it's not Lewis Hamilton in a 2020 Mercedes.
Exactly. Whereas, like, now, Max Verstappen is that guy, and you could see from the start of the race that he wasn't confident in keeping Max Verstappen at bay, at least for the first few corners, and wasn't able to. There's a bit of a, I don't know. He's got confidence, and I love that confidence from Lando, and I do think he's got that adaptability. Like, I like that there was another radio message where he said to the team, like, the team were sort of giving him strategy choices, and he said, like, I'd rather go for the win and come third than settle for second place. And like, he ended up with second place anyway, but I did like that. He wants to go for the victories rather than...
Was that the one where they were saying, "Oh, if we pit now, we can cover off George," and he's like, "I don't care about George."
Yes.
Backed.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. No, it is definitely true. It is good that he backs himself. I think it's just, as a team in general, just need to be that bit tidier at the end of the day. They need to be that bit tidier because when you don't have the outright quickest car, it comes down to who does the best on the day.
Yeah.
Which in this case, in all phases of the race, I'm not sure that's the right phrase, it goes to Red Bull. Verstappen on the start, the pit stops. Strategy was kind of fine between the two, but
I feel like the best strategy was kind of a mix, right? Like, I feel like Max Verstappen got away with it in the first stint just because he had so much open road in front of him. But the best strategy was kind of something in between, because we also saw George Russell not have a good strategy because of that, right? He ended up taking the victory, but then that final stint on the hard compound tyre, he was just a sitting duck to Lewis Hamilton. It was just like, okay, so clearly the strategy going early wasn't quite there. The strategy going really late was not quite there, but you kind of had to go somewhere in the middle, which was what Lewis Hamilton did, right? So he ended up coming in third place, and I think probably had the optimal strategy. Like Lewis Hamilton said himself,
Yeah.
on another day, probably could have won. Probably could have been, sorry, at least closer to that top two.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
he said
Was it in
he
the
probably wouldn't have won, but
cool
would have
down?
been closer.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I heard it in the cool down room. He's saying like if they didn't have that bit at the beginning, where obviously George kind of fell back from Verstappen, then like it is a bit closer. And I think that is true. I mean, at the end of the day, that whole group, I think on the soft and the mediums, were all very close, as in
Mhm.
the Mercedes and the Ferraris. Norris obviously was in that group because he was sort of stuck in it. But on the softs and the mediums, they were all very similar. And I think it was partly because George probably pushed a bit hard and hurt his tyres a bit. And so was kind
Yeah.
of therefore controlling the pace, but they were all kind of similar in that range. And so ultimately it just came down to, who did everything else best, i.e. the strategy, where Sainz wrong with hards,
Yeah.
Russell wrong with hards, Norris right call, moved up ahead, Hamilton right call, moved up ahead.
Yeah.
So yeah, ultimately it's those fine margins, and it is good because now that we have four teams who all have, I would say, the potential to win. That's not saying they could win a race. That's
Yeah.
the potential for it. It just means that all those other bits and pieces have to be right. And I feel like Mercedes last weekend, not last weekend, last race,
Yeah.
and this weekend have kind of done that now.
Yes.
And you're sort of seeing that they're in a position where their car is good enough that if you make the right choices, you're on for podiums, or maybe like 5 to 10 seconds off the lead rather than 50.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's been a long learning curve for Mercedes. I think we could definitely say that, like 2022, 2023, they've been like knocking on the door. There's been weekends where it's like, oh, is this the one? This the one? And now I
yeah.
know I'm saying it again, and I feel like don't want to get too ahead of myself because it is just two races in a row.
And
But
it is a track like Spain where they generally have always
yeah,
done well, and
that's true.
Canada where they've generally always done well.
But at least I want to say, well, let's start on George Russell's side of the garage because obviously he did lead the Grand Prix for a moment.
Mm.
Like, it was a fleeting moment, but was in the mix. Had that strategy not gone, slightly wrong for him, I think Mercedes just made the wrong call, and he was a little bit frustrated as well after the race just because of how it played out. Like, I think George Russell, and this came more from Canada side of things than Spain, so kind of taking that with a pinch of salt this weekend. But it does feel like George Russell is so aware of the fact that he is now the future of Mercedes. Like, Lewis Hamilton is definitely leaving. Whereas, like,
Kimi Antonelli says, "Hold my K2O" because he's not old enough to drink.
not quite. He will be just after the summer break. Although they've changed the license rules, like, just for him. Even though in like 2 months' time he is actually 18 and would be eligible. It's been a bit of a weird
Yeah,
season for Kimi Antonelli.
yeah,
But yeah, George Russell kind of knows, like, the last couple of seasons, he's been trying to replace Lewis Hamilton, right? He's been trying to
yeah.
show that he's like at least Lewis Hamilton level. Now he definitely knows that Lewis Hamilton is leaving. Like, that is a
Mm,
guarantee. It almost feels like he's trying too hard sometimes. And it's those little errors. I think the most obvious one is like Singapore, where he bundled it into the
yeah.
wall. But similar in Canada last weekend, it was a tiny little error.
Oh,
And then
Australia, Melbourne.
Melbourne, Australia as well. Yeah. And then this weekend, it wasn't so much that, but it was maybe just pushing a little bit too hard on those tires, which then led him to having to take that strategy where he went onto
Mm,
the hards and went slightly different. Because Lewis Hamilton was actually saying they were never wanting to put hards on the car. Like, they weren't going to put hards on Lewis Hamilton's car at all at any point. Maybe George Russell was covering off Carlos Sainz, but seems a bit strange for Mercedes to like be that worried about a Ferrari that was in the end quite far behind.
mm. Yeah, I think with George, it is as you say. Like the last couple of years, it's been a case of both drivers working together to just do as well as they can because the car's not been there. They just need the results. And as you say, it's no secret that the dynamic this year is incredibly different. It might not be as extreme as favouring George Russell,
Yeah.
as we've heard, to that extent, but it is definitely a different dynamic in the sense of, I think if you're Toto Wolff, you do want to be seeing, if your drivers finish third and fourth, you want George Russell to be the third place driver.
Yeah.
Like last weekend, that last weekend Toto Wolff would have been happy because George Russell was the third place driver. If Lewis Hamilton was really comfortably beating George Russell all the time, then it would be a bit like, oh dear, things don't look good. But because in general he has performed generally well, it doesn't feel that way as such. But like you say, that does open it up to the fact that he knows he is going to be, and he is going to be the team lead
Yes.
for probably at least I'd say at least 2 years
Mhm.
when Kimi Antonelli comes in. Like, I'd say at least, it's like Piastri coming into McLaren.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, that's the very
brilliant
similar.
talent, brilliant talent. Norris is still the team lead for a good couple of years, looking like it's going to be longer than two years probably. So it is kind of similar in that sense with George Russell now being like, okay, I've got to be in charge. And I do sort of see what you mean, that it is a tendency that he tends to just push a little bit too hard at points. It's not necessarily big crashes or mistakes, but he still is yet to learn, I think, just a little bit of, almost like a little bit of control and
Mhm.
viewing bigger picture. And that's what someone like Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen are all amazing at doing, is going, I don't need to quite kill my tires right now, or I need to save a little bit here and there because it matters later on. Whereas I feel like George gives off that little bit of just a sense of, I just want to go for it.
Yeah.
I just want to go, drive as fast as I can. And obviously, it's probably not the case. Like, they're F1 drivers, they know that they have to manage tires and do all these kinds of things. But George more so, I'd say, than the others in that group. Like, I would say Lando's probably, in my opinion, like the second for this.
Mhm.
Going, I just want to drive as fast as I can.
Yeah.
And at some point, you kind of have to, like, you have to balance that more and more, which he'll learn, but it's just something that needs a bit of time still to
Yeah, I think
fully kind of iron
as
out.
you were saying that, I kind of remembered it was really near the start of the race. I think he was still in second place, possibly even that first stint. And there was a radio message from his engineer sort of saying like, "How are the tires doing? Like, how are you doing in terms of like pushing? What push level are you at?"
Yeah,
And he said, "Better, like more than anyone else." So he was pushing harder and faster, trying to get more out of those tires than anyone else who was around him. Verstappen, Norris, Hamilton behind as well. Like, George Russell was aware of the fact that he was really pushing, and
yeah,
that maybe, like, we don't know. Maybe his engineer was like, "Great, good." Maybe his engineer was like, "Well, if you could like rein it back just a touch, that would be beneficial
mm,
for the kind of longer run of the race." But having said that, Lewis Hamilton back on the podium. First time he's been on the podium since Mexico last year, I want to say.
yes, yeah,
And
yeah. It is.
just nice to see Lewis Hamilton like a little bit happy. He has been very miserable this season.
Yeah. Do you know? I think it's almost like with Hamilton this year, it's very much a case of, yeah, they're not doing amazingly great, but at the same time, like, he's already kind of accepted that this year in his career is like a write off. You know, doesn't matter, nothing, because he's already decided that he's leaving. And so to him, he's like, yes, they're not doing as well, but I feel like he's sort of just like, yeah, it is what it is. It's where we are. Because, and so for him to get the podium this year, it is more of a case of like, oh, this is quite nice,
Yeah.
you know, as opposed to it being more of a like, yes, guys, this is really steps in the right direction. It's amazing. This is just what we needed. It's more of a, oh, okay, I'll add this to my 197 others.
Yeah. It's
I
ridiculous.
always love seeing that whenever Hamilton gets a podium, and it's like, we've got a new record for podiums as Lewis Hamilton beats Lewis Hamilton, or like any of his
Yeah, yeah.
records or whatever. It's just like, oh, Lewis Hamilton now holds the record, beating the previous holder, Lewis Hamilton. But I do think it is good in a sense. And would you say the last couple of weekends post Monaco? Because I think leading up to Monaco,
Mhm.
everyone in the F1 kind of community was, you'd have the jokes being like, "Well, Hamilton's pleased, isn't he?" Because
Yeah,
you're right.
yeah.
Have the last couple of races swayed you a little bit more into the sense where he might just have a little bit of like, oh, the Mercedes is kind of on par with the Ferrari now.
Yeah. Starting to look like,
Do
well,
you think?
yeah, the last couple of weekends you'd say so, right? Like Ferrari had an absolutely abysmal weekend in Canada. Was better but not incredible this weekend as well. And we'll delve into the civil war that is happening in Ferrari in a moment. But yeah, I think you can definitely, I mean, anyone outside of Red Bull at this point is still like, well, Red Bull are clearly the fastest. They are the ones to catch. But yeah, considering where Mercedes were to Ferrari in the first 5 races this year, and now it does feel like Mercedes are gaining a little bit of momentum. Ferrari have maybe just hit a little bit of a stagnant point. Like they did bring a lot of upgrades to this weekend, and it didn't seem to make too much of a difference. Like the Ferrari was still clearly slower than Max Verstappen, than Lando Norris, and than both Mercedes cars in terms of qualifying and in terms of race pace as well. So I feel like Lewis Hamilton, I don't think he'll regret it. I do think it's one of those things where it was always going to happen. Like every single year, we did a when will Hamilton move to Ferrari video. I feel like everyone just got that summer break, not a lot going on. Hamilton to Ferrari, that could happen, right? Like another video. So it was going to happen at some point, and I feel like he'll be happy for the new challenge. Whether or not he'll be overly happy if he comes into the first race next season, George Russell's on the podium and he ends up like 7th or 8th. That's a very different story. Like, it's going to
Yeah.
be definitely one to watch, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's going to be that whole kind of if Mercedes were still where they were at the start of this year, then I think you go into next season, you're like, he's made his decision, right decision.
Yeah.
But just these last couple of weekends, you do have that little bit of like, maybe Mercedes have kind of figured out what to be doing. And especially when you look at this weekend, where if things all went right for them, I don't think they would have won, but I do think they would have kind of been having at least conversations of, do you think there's a way that we could try and win this, as opposed to just, guys, let's try and get on the podium,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Although,
Um,
like on that note, I think it will be so much more entertaining to see next year if the Mercedes and Ferrari kind of are on par with one another.
yeah.
Like George Russell and Lewis Hamilton already collide fairly often, and their
That's
teammates.
gonna be
Like, there's gonna be a race where Russell and Hamilton collide. Russell is in the Mercedes, Hamilton is in the Ferrari, and the bedlam of news that is gonna come out from around that.
yeah,
Like, as you say, like the talking points already this season. Well, Toto Wolff, if you see this, I'm not saying it's me that's like putting those rumors out there, but there's been a lot of rumors going around that George Russell's car has kind of had the benefit of the doubt, which, as you said, you should do. He is the driver that is kind of moving into next season with you. But, the whole talk around Lewis Hamilton's car not being set up correctly so that George can be kind of front runner. Toto Wolff obviously put a full rest to that, and I don't want a cease and assist letter coming my way, but it does feel like they're definitely moving in that direction. There's going to be an incident between Russell and Hamilton, whether it's this year
yeah,
or next, probably both. And there's going to be sparks. Like there's always going to be storylines between Hamilton and Mercedes.
yeah, for sure. I do get the definite sense of, like, when again, I've said this a couple of times in this video, but like when I think back to 2021 and that Verstappen Hamilton, I think it just felt in my lifetime like the most just polar opposite kind of
Mhm.
battle. Even if you look back to like Hamilton Vettel, it didn't feel like that. Vettel Alonso didn't feel like that. I feel like those two. I feel like a Russell Hamilton fight in different cars would feel similar to that.
Yeah.
They'd both be like, "I'm not giving you any space. I'm not giving you any space." Whereas if you look at, say, like Verstappen Norris, it's completely different. It's totally different.
Yeah.
Whereas I do feel like, and even I'd say Norris Hamilton is different. Like they've had a few battles before, and generally they've left each other's space. They've generally worked through. Whereas I feel like Russell Hamilton would 100% just be one of those like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm just. Is there a red car to my left? No. Is there a grey car to my right? No. Just
Yeah. But I mean,
So
we've already seen
100%.
it, right? Like you look back at Japan last year, Qatar last year. There's probably someone missing off the list where it was very close, if not the two teammates already touching. And I mean, that's
Same last
happening at
year.
Ferrari as well now. Like it's just across the
Yeah.
board. If you're teammates, you don't like each other at the moment because we had
Well, to be
Gasly and
fair,
Ocon, who we'll get to. Goodness gracious me, what is going on there between them two? Hamilton and Russell clearly don't like each other. And now Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz literally just, you can tell they're not going to be teammates at the end of the season because they've been fairly harmonious throughout their time at Ferrari together. And now all gloves have come off. It's just ridiculous. Did you catch any of the like post-race Ferrari antics? It was
I didn't see
interesting.
the interviews themselves, but I did see some of the quotes.
Mm.
But the thing is, no matter how much they argue, I just feel like Carlos Sainz can't win.
No.
Like you, you can't win this one, Carlos. It doesn't matter what you say. I mean, but then again, you could argue that maybe he can't lose because whatever he says, they've already said you're leaving.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't look good. And this was another thing that I meant to say earlier when we were talking about Verstappen winning, and how I was saying how this race feels like it sums up the season.
Mhm.
And that's because it felt very much like Verstappen's out ahead, and if one of the challenging pack had a clean run, they've got a shot to win. But
Yeah.
because they all squabble among themselves and they all fight each other, no one really like they all take points off of each other.
Yeah.
Whereas Verstappen still is at the top, and it's almost kind of like that, even just internally. Like the Ferrari guys, again, if they just worked together as much as they could, they should get possibly second in the constructors. They're fighting against McLaren and potentially Mercedes in a bit. Whereas you just get that sense of like none of the four drivers in Mercedes or Ferrari have real reasons to do stuff for the team.
Yeah.
And so everything is just a bit kind of like, I don't care, we're just going to fight amongst ourselves. And then that leads to Verstappen being a bit easier for Verstappen at times.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Verstappen is definitely looking at that and being like, thank God I've got a teammate who is nowhere close. Like it's just like,
Yeah.
them at Ferrari and Mercedes, they seem to be having a really tough time with one another. Whereas, like, hang on, I've got the quote.
Can you imagine Leclerc Hamilton next year?
Oh, see, this is the thing, right? But it will go back to, because they know they've got to be teammates for a little bit longer, it'll go back to being a little bit more harmonious. Like this season, it really seems to have come to a proper like head. Right? It's just like it's all gone wrong. Because Charles Leclerc said, I think Sainz will see the images and understand that I was on the inside line and he shouldn't have turned in at that point, talking about the incident that they had where they kind of banged wheels with one another. Yeah. Then Carlos Sainz was shown the images and asked by the Sky team, like, what do you think? And Carlos Sainz just said, it's too many times that he complains after the race about something. Like, I was on the attack. We were on new softs. He was, the Mercedes were on used softs. We had to go for it. He was too slow. I passed him. Like, just absolutely, like, disregard for anything Charles Leclerc said. Disregard for the fact that they are teammates. Just, I wanted the position. I took the position. And I decided to continue on from that point.
It's like, I see it, I want it, I take it. Yeah, no, it did feel like that. And then did Charles say something along the lines of like, oh, well, he says all this kind of stuff. I don't know if it's just the way he acts, because that's just where he's at in his career. Obviously, referring to the fact that like, he's leaving the team. Yeah, it does seem, I personally on that incident, I kind of sit sort of in the middle of it where yes, Carlos is coming by, he is going ahead. However, if you look at Leclerc's onboard, like he does kind of squish him in. It's a little bit like, do you remember was it last year or the year before? Last year I think Spa, where Hamilton made contact with Alonso in Belgium.
Yeah.
And it's like, you've got the speed, you can make this overtake work. You don't need to be as like aggressive with it.
Mhm.
And it feels kind of similar to that. It's like you should get by him. You've got better tires, you've got the speed, but you didn't need to just be like move
Didn't need to
sort of
weave
thing.
in front of him and sort of try and take off a bit of his front wing at the same time. Yeah, it was that.
Yeah.
Well, I think they got lucky, right? The fact that they kind of touched wheels and nothing
Mm.
happened. If that had been a bit of front wing, I feel like the story would have been very different. Like if Charles Leclerc had to pit
Or
or like
punctures. Yeah.
or puncture, yeah, exactly. Like is lucky that they ended up finishing kind of where they should anyway. Like whether Charles Leclerc or Carlos Sainz should have come 5th or 6th, I don't think at the end of the season they'll be too worried about that as like a turning point through the year. But yeah, it was just more the fact that they had that going on, as you say, then taking away positions and speed and possible attacks later on in the race. Like Charles Leclerc was what, a second off, less than a second off
Less than a
Russell.
second. Less than half a second.
And that battle with Carlos
Yeah.
Sainz maybe is the difference there. You know, you're looking again.
Yeah.
It's so tight at the top. Those fine margins are everything,
Yeah.
and it is just so close. Although I do feel like we kind of touched upon it a little bit already. The awkward conversation around Ferrari and the fact that they started the year. They are still second in the constructors' championship, but it does feel like Lando Norris is kind of edging away. He's taken second place in the Drivers' Championship from Leclerc. It does feel like he is closer to Verstappen now in terms of just out-and-out pace. And then it does feel like if the Mercedes get involved, they're starting to get the edge over on the Ferrari cars. And Ferrari now find themselves in a little bit of an awkward spot where instead of trying to look at Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship, even though Red Bull only have one driver at the moment, like they actually might be looking backwards and looking at McLaren catching them or Mercedes catching them in the constructors instead.
Yeah, I mean, post Monaco, they weren't that far off leading the constructors.
Yeah.
They were literally a bad weekend for Red Bull and a good weekend for Ferrari, and they would have been leading, genuinely. And now it's like you're sort of 60-ish, 60 points behind. Momentum's not with you. Doesn't look like it's as feasible. I say their only saving grace is that they are fighting half a team in Red Bull. But yeah, I just think with Ferrari, I know that since Vasseurs come in, it has been different. It's not been as bad as it used to be. However, these last couple of races feel very like old Ferrari.
Yeah.
You know?
There's still a few like
Things just
ghosts of Ferrari's past like kicking about in the garage. Like,
yeah, it's almost like when something starts or some sort of issue begins, instead of just like fixing it instantly, they kind of like overreact to it. And like, I'm not saying that's what it is, but that's the feeling that I kind of get. And so in this one, it's just a case of you had the momentum after Monaco and very quickly just lost it. And where the constructors is concerned, I think the other thing is Piastri's been a bit hit and miss.
True.
In terms of results,
Mhm.
which has kind of helped them, meaning that they're still a good sort of 30 odd points ahead.
Yeah.
Like Piastri's a little bit off of that top route, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I had that as kind of the next talking point. Like looking at that finishing position, you sort of got the top 6 who sort of had moments in the race where they were stunning, had moments in the race that went kind of wrong. And that top 6 kind of felt like, okay, they're the 6 drivers that are properly going to be in the battle for podiums, if you know what I mean. Like they seem like the standout 6. And then just behind that, you've got Perez and Piastri. Well, Piastri and Perez the other way around. So Piastri finishing in 7th, Perez finishing in 8th. And it did just feel like they're obviously at 2 very different points in their career. Oscar Piastri right at the start. Sergio Perez, we thought right at the end. He's got a couple more seasons at least in the bank. But they both feel like the teammate that is just a little bit lost at this moment in time. Like it feels like all of the positivity is about Lando Norris. All of the positivity from Red Bull is about Max Verstappen. And it just feels like neither of them are quite able to actually close in on that top 6. It just feels like by the end of the season, it might be quite a considerable gap. Perez might just be in there just because the Red Bull is quick enough on some circuits, and also he's got a good chunk of points from the start of the season. But feels like it's going to be that top 6, and then Oscar Piastri quite a distance off that.
Yeah, it's kind of what we saw last year, and I think it's almost a case of, in general, Piastri's pace is there. Like,
Yeah.
it's not awful, but it just seems to be that there's always something. For example, Monaco, everything went fine. However, it just feels like there's always something that isn't quite right, whether it's he's not being able to manage his tires as well, or this case qualifying didn't go great, because you look at it and at the end of the day he's finished like 2-ish seconds off of Carlos Sainz,
Yeah.
having started a good few places back and getting a bit stuck behind the Alpines, and he still finished there. So the pace was definitely there, but the qualifying wasn't.
Yeah.
So it just feels like with Oscar Piastri, something doesn't quite go right each time. And with that group as tight as they are, effectively 1 through 8, that's enough to drop you from a P4 to a P8 or a P7 kind of range. And I feel just that's what kind of happens. And when your teammate is kind of consistently on podiums now, that gap in the standings opens up quite quickly. It's a similar thing that we see with Perez. I mean, Perez is now, what, 100 and something odd
108 points off Verstappen after 10
right,
races.
So the gap between him and Max is as many points as he has.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's got roughly a third of the team's points, and we've talked about the ratio, the percentages in the past. Well, for those that have never come across James, we've had multiple conversations and we've talked about the kind of rough points percentage that the second driver needs to be getting. And I think the conclusion that we came to was like, a good second driver, you want to be getting at least 60% of the points.
Yeah.
If you're getting between 50 and 60, you're like, you probably should be getting a bit more. If you're getting less than 50, it's like you're in danger territory. And if you get less than 40, it's like, this is not good. Really
like absolutely not really worth talking about.
So like the comparables that we always used was like Lance Stroll, for example, against like Alonso, and he was at like 20% or something. Or
yeah.
Something ridiculous.
Well, let's look. Fernando Alonso's 41. Lance Stroll just under 50%. He's in the 40% range.
Yeah,
and that's what we like.
But in previous years,
oh yeah, definitely.
Perez, the fact that Perez is there and we're only 10 races in, it's just he's got his 2-year deal. So it's all good in itself. Yeah, whereas Piastri, I do think is different. Piastri's kind of like it. You can see it there, and you can see it there enough. Whereas with Perez, it's kind of like we have seen it there occasionally, but now it's like I just don't expect to see that good.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like, well, you kind of look at it. Oscar Piastri, he hasn't had a terrible season. I don't want to just throw him under the bus. Like, he's had a couple of 4th place finishes, and they turn into podiums, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, he's got a couple of trophies he can take home, various bits and pieces like that. But it's 87 points to Lando Norris is 150. The Mercedes are very quickly catching him as well. So it just feels like Russell Hamilton, it's almost inevitable that they're going to overtake him in the standings at some point in the season, as long as they continue on the trajectory that they're on. And as you say, Q3, the fact that he, track limits violation for his first lap in Q3, although he went on a scrubbed set of tyres. So even if he would have got that lap correct, he would have only finished, or he'd have only started in front of the Alpines. But then again, he was stuck behind Gasly for such a long time. Like, he gets that banker lap in, starts in front of the Alpines. Maybe the race is a little bit different for him. And as you say, only a couple of seconds off Sainz.
Yeah.
Could have done differently.
No, so.
And then
second lap.
Second lap in Q3, also kind of deleted for track limits, but was completely ruined because he went into the gravel. So it was like both laps in Q3, he completely just threw away any opportunity of qualifying. And that's when he started in 9th because Sergio Perez also had a 3-place penalty. Just both of them. Like, as I say, like, there's a lot of comparisons between Perez and Piastri at the moment. Like, they both have now got 2-year deals. They're both going to be staying at their teams until the end of 2026. They both seem a little bit off the pace in comparison to their teammate. But as you say, Perez, we expect to be a lot closer to Max Verstappen, considering how long has Perez been in Formula One? Like 10, 15 years? Like, it's got to be like
Yeah,
forever, right? Oscar Piastri, it's his second season. We're still giving a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, although that's going to run out very soon. Like, he's over
yeah,
30 Grand Prix now in Formula One, which is
yeah. I mean, the thing
in
I'd
old
say,
money, that's
with,
like 3 seasons.
yeah, with Piastri, I think it's more of a case of you make the mistake, but it feels a bit more like an individual mistake.
Yeah.
As in, makes a mistake this weekend. Okay, the next one went better. Or you look at Monaco, had that high kind of level, or he's had like the sprint race win. Like he's had those moments where you go, yeah, it's definitely there, can do it, just needs more consistency. Whereas with Perez, it's like, so this is bad, then the next one's bad, and it's still bad, and then maybe 1 in 5,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, that was decent, kind of thing. Whereas Piastri, it's like, okay, maybe at the moment 2 out of the 5 don't go well,
Yeah.
but then 2 out of them you go, actually that was very good, pretty decent, and then one of them you go, actually that was really good.
Yeah.
Whereas Perez is sort of like 3 of them go terrible, one goes not great, and one goes average, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which I think is that slight difference between them. Obviously the age as well and the experience and that sort of thing. However, given that McLaren are now in this fight for second
Mhm.
place
Yeah.
in the constructors, arguably first, if things continue the way they go, you do kind of look at it and go, you've got to step up just that bit more.
A little bit. Just a little bit. I'm not expecting him to win races. That's what I mean. I just
No,
want a
no,
little bit more from Piastri.
no.
Which is,
Take points away from the Ferraris and the
yes.
Mercedes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. It was like, okay. Because I think someone asked me this actually on the live stream. Like, they were looking at the fact that Oscar Piastri was starting behind both Alpines. And they asked me, like, where should Oscar Piastri finish? And like it was difficult to tell what the Ferrari's race pace was like, but I said a good race from Piastri would be getting past the Alpines fairly swiftly, and then at
Yeah.
least having a go at the Ferraris. You know what I mean? Like maybe not getting past one of them, but at least being in the mix and having a proper battle with at least one of the Ferrari duo that was there in front. And that just never really happened. Like he got stuck behind the Alpine for way too long. Pierre Gasly, to be fair to him, did a great defensive job, but was there for too long and then was catching up to the Ferraris at the end, but never actually in the mix and never actually able to battle with them. And as you said, like he just takes a few points off the Ferraris here and there. That's massive for the constructor standings and allows McLaren to just keep pace with Ferrari a little bit easier in the constructor standings as well. And that's what the team will be looking for, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think you've just got to be looking for consistent, decent results.
Yeah.
And Oscar's kind of doing more like inconsistent, good results,
Yes.
if that kind of makes sense.
Whereas, as you
So
said,
just a
Sergio
little bit.
Perez, and to be fair, I haven't actually got your thoughts on the Sergio Perez contract. I don't think we've spoken since.
No.
Just run me through it. Like you saw it come up. You know, we before the
Yeah.
season we were like, oh, who could Max Verstappen's teammate be? Will it be Sonoda? Will it be Ricardo? Maybe a Carlos Sainz? Maybe Fernando Alonso gets that Red Bull seat. And then it's like Red Bull just ruin it. They're like, no, Sergio Perez, another 2 years. I suppose on one side you can see it from Christian Horner's perspective, and you can say it's a team that has won the constructors' title a couple years in a row. It's settled. There's a clear 1-2 dynamic. Like they don't have the problems that Mercedes and Ferrari currently have with their drivers just
Mm.
butting heads a lot of the time, mainly because Sergio Perez isn't on the same piece of road as Max Verstappen to butt heads a lot of the time. But
Mm.
on the other side of things, you're looking at a team, the gap is closing to Red Bull. Ferrari's, McLaren's, now Mercedes looking closer. And it does feel like the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull are fighting with one car a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think 100% you ask 90% of fans, they will say Red Bull should have someone better in that seat. However, I can understand the re-signing of Perez, given how everything else has played out.
Mm.
For example, you know, okay, potential candidates. Alonso resigns, not him. Albon, he resigns, not him. So you're left with Carlos Sainz. My understanding is that Carlos Sainz's dad and Jos Verstappen don't get on well, and so it's unlikely that that was really ever going to work. Um, and then you go, okay, so it's not Carlos Sainz, and then you go, well, so who do you put in? Because I don't think there's anyone left that you can say, yeah, they will definitely do better. Because while people have gone, you in my head you go, okay, Yuki Tsunoda's been brilliant. However, I don't think you can have that 100% confidence to go. You put Yuki Tsunoda in the car, and it's definitely going to be better than Perez enough to be like, yeah, it was worth making that change.
Hmm. Yeah.
And same with, say, I don't know, say you brought in a Gasly or something from Alpine, or I don't know who else could possibly fill that seat. But you get what I'm trying to say. They're just, after you go through the likes of Alonso's and Sainz's, maybe Albon's, you kind of go, I don't really know who is 100% going to be better than Perez.
Yeah.
And in that case, you go with what you know and what you understand, which is which is Sergio to Red Bull. Like, he's been there for a few years now. They know what they're getting, kind of thing. And yeah, stability over change.
Stability over anything that could be moderately
Yeah,
entertaining. It's
I
just
tell you what, why don't they just put a rookie in? That would be
that was the thing. Liam Lawson was also in the, did so well for 5 races. That earns you a seat in the best team on the grid. That's what I've heard.
yeah.
You score points in Singapore, you outqualify Max Verstappen in Singapore, get yourself a Red Bull seat. That's
Mm.
although Liam Lawson not even looking like he's going to get an RB seat at this point. Like Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, that's looking like more and more
Well,
likely
Yuki's
that might
staying now.
click. Yuki's definite,
Yuki,
yeah.
yeah. I feel like it's probably a case of it'll come down to, like, they want Ricardo doing well so badly.
Yeah.
But it's just not happening.
But they want to keep
It's
Ricciardo for the financial reasons, right? They want to keep Ricciardo because he is great for advertising the team.
marketing. Yeah.
Like, I think that's the whole reason they kind of got him in, to be honest. They knew that this whole Visa Cash App complete change was coming,
That's good.
and Daniel Ricciardo's like the face of it. You know what I mean? As much as Yuki Tsunoda's doing the stuff out on track, off track, Daniel Ricciardo's the one that's in the photos, in all of the promo videos. Like, it's Daniel Ricciardo that's kind of leading that sense of things. I think he's just almost, like, don't get me wrong, Daniel Ricciardo is a really good Formula One driver, but it does feel like he's in that team as more of a press sort of
Token
person.
kind of.
Yeah, like, he's really good in front of a camera. So just put him in front of a camera. He's kind of the Liam Lawson. I don't know, maybe Liam Lawson Williams, another one that I'm kind of 50-50 on, thinking of.
Especially if Antonelli's going to Mercedes straight
Yeah,
up. So
I think that's pretty much done, isn't it? Kimi Antonelli to Mercedes.
do you reckon? Do you reckon? I know we've gone on a bit of a tangent into driver market now,
It's fine.
but do you think the better Mercedes start doing, the more concerned they become about Antonelli going straight in? I mean, I don't know who they could put in now. Is it just Sainz, really? Yeah, Sainz.
Sainz, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, do you reckon the better they become? Because when they were initially starting to talk about it, they were further down. They weren't really doing much, and you're like, he goes in now, it's fine. Now you're looking at it going, well, in some races they're the third team. By the
Yeah.
end of the year, they may well be the second quickest team in some places. Do we want to put a rookie into that?
Don't put a rookie
especially
in.
especially a rookie who isn't having the best. Don't get me wrong, I'm not doubting Kimi Antonelli's talent, but he's not having the best of years in Formula 2. So yeah, I don't know if it changes now that Mercedes are doing a bit better.
I think
Sort of like
the problem is, like too many seats are being confirmed at this point. Like, as you say, they've kind of maybe
Too
left it a
many
little bit
seats
late.
lower down the order are. Yeah.
Yeah, like Carlos Sainz, as you say, is still available. But like I thought first off when Lewis Hamilton left, I thought the best person to go into that seat before this season had even started, like before we saw a
Yeah.
race, Hamilton is confirmed Ferrari. What do Mercedes do? I thought Alex Albon. Like, that was the first driver that came to my mind.
Yeah.
But he's now confirmed at Williams. Fernando Alonso's always in the mix because it's Fernando Alonso and he loves a move. So he's now also confirmed at Aston Martin. And you're starting to get those kind of solid drivers that they maybe could have, teased away from a team that are now just confirmed. Like they've got their contracts.
They put Ocon in for a year.
That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Ocon. And that moves us nicely onto Alpine because Ocon has thrown his dummy out the pram and is definitely leaving Alpine. Like, I love the fact that he didn't go out with a whimper either. It's like proper Esteban Ocon. I'm going to smash into my teammate at Monaco, and then a couple of days later, I'm leaving. Like, it's proper Esteban Ocon. Like, if you're going to do it properly, ruin it. Just throw it in the bin.
I'm just thinking about it now. I mean, I don't know if you want to chat about Alpine at Barcelona first, but or if we wanted to stick with driver market. But I'm kind of looking at it. I say if he was considered for the Mercedes seat, the benefit I have is I don't think they'd have a problem replacing him with Antonelli in a year or two's time.
True.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
Whereas Carlos Sainz, you have the same kind of thing where you go, it's one thing replacing Carlos Sainz with Lewis Hamilton. It's another thing replacing him with one of your. Yeah, I mean, they did it with Bottas, so to be fair, they can do it. But if they did put Ocon in, especially because he is managed by Toto Wolff, I could see them being like, okay, Esteban, you've had a year or two now. Bye. But if Esteban doesn't go to Mercedes, I don't know where he does go.
Yeah, I genuinely didn't know this either. Like, well, we can talk about Alpine in the conjunction of Barcelona and the future. I don't know where Esteban Ocon goes because
it's not going to be Williams.
No, I don't think Williams take that gamble on him. I feel like Liam Lawson is way more likely to go to Williams or even Carlos Sainz.
Yeah,
but I feel like Carlos Sainz ends up probably at Stakes Alba, then Audi. I feel like that's kind of the path that he's going down now. I feel like he's left it too late for other areas.
I feel like at the end of the day, he just didn't want this year next year of being at the back of the grid.
Yeah,
and there's no guarantees how he's going to be anywhere either.
It's a big risk, isn't it? Anywhere you go, it's a big risk. Like 2026, looking at the regulation changes is going to be a massive change up, and well, we say this every time the regulations come around. I feel like the Red Bulls, the Mercedes, the McLarens, the Ferraris are still going to be up towards the top, but anything could happen. All of those things could change. And Esteban Ocon, I really don't know where he sits. Maybe he goes to Stake Sauber. Does he go to Haas? I feel like he goes to Haas. Like Ollie Behrman and Ocon.
Would you get rid of K-Mag for Ocon?
Bit younger.
I guess it's no longer good to love K-Mag.
Yeah, that's true.
Even if he did smash his doors. But... yeah, I don't know. And I feel like as well, just to loop back to the actual race that we're supposedly talking
the fact that Alpine actually scored double points and we haven't talked about that
yet. Yeah. However, I would say like Ocon isn't doing such an incredible, amazing job that you go like a team goes, oh, we've got to have him, we've got to keep him, etc. It's like Daniel Ricciardo. If Daniel Ricciardo was dropped from RB, I don't think anyone's going, oh, we've got to snap him up.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening with Esteban Ocon. Is he's not doing such an incredible job, and he has now had a bit of a history of problems in most places he's gone, that no one kind of looks at it or looks at him and goes, gotta have that. It's not like back at when he was at Force India, he was kind of young talent. I mean, how old is he now? 27, 28?
Is he the same age as Gasly? 27?
27. So, yeah, maybe he's the one that doesn't make it. Looking like, because, Gasly's 28.
Oh, is he?
27. Yeah.
But
I don't know, but going back to this race, it just sort of sums up. You're doing fine, but not lighting the world on fire.
Yeah.
in general for this season is what I would say.
Well, I mean, Gasly still had the upper hand, right? Gasly still, and it was the end of 2023. Gasly was like properly leading the charge for Alpine. Then, kind of the beginning of this season, where they were, well, nowhere. It did feel like Ocon maybe just had the advantage over Gasly. It's starting to feel like it's swinging the other way. Obviously, Gasly picking up a few more points in the last few races. Gasly on 5 points, Ocon on 3 points. Constructor standings, though, Alpine jump up into 7th place. Move up in
with
front
a
of
grand
Haas.
total of 8 points.
Well, I know, but considering, you like, well, I said at the beginning, Nico Hülkenberg has finished 11th, 5 out of the last 7 races.
Yeah.
Like, Haas do that, though. Haas start the season so well, and then it sort of tails off. It's tailed off even earlier than I thought it was going to tail off. But Hülkenberg is doing his best to at least knock on the door of points. Alpine, though, like, is this as much of a shock? Like, because I was kind of thinking about it during the race, and I was looking at the Alpines running in like the 5th fastest car slot, and I was like, well, they were comfortably 6th fastest last year. Like, they did finish 6th in the constructor standings by a margin. Like, they were nowhere near the top 5, don't get me wrong.
Comfortably 10th to start this year.
Yeah, but the thing was, they were comfortably 10th at the start of this year, but they added a lot of weight to the car because they failed the crash test at the beginning of the season. So then they had to completely redesign that part of the car. So that was like the first 3 races effectively abandoned. And then they had to completely redesign the floor to go along with the fact that they completely redesigned that part of the car. So it feels like they're almost just back to where they were last year. They've kind of fixed the problems that they had at the start of the season, got the new floor in, they've put the car to the level of ride height that it needs to be, and they're kind of back to 5th or 6th fastest. It's kind of like, oh, okay, we just
forget as well
got back to where we were.
That nearly every single member of personnel has changed.
Very true. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is just on track, is what I'm talking about. Off track, my goodness me, that is still a fire. The entire Alpine board is just, I assume, just 10 men who just know one of them is being fired within the next couple of weeks. I assume it's just
like they sit down and like credit card roulette where people play where they put all the credit cards in and they do that, but it's like getting fired. Like they put a little spinner in the middle and whoever ends up pointing at it's like, well, your turn now. No, I do feel like with Alpine, it's not a huge surprise that they're hit. Like if you said to me after 10 at race 1, if you said after 10 races they'll look like the 5th quickest team, I'd be like, okay, I can see Aston Martin falling back, and I guess they just about edge it, which is kind of where they are.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been crazily surprising. However, I just feel like they're in this constant cycle of always being like, we're looking to take the next step.
Yeah.
Don't make it, fall backwards. Build back up again. We're looking to take the next step. Don't make it, fall backward. And it just happens again and again, whether they're Renault, Alpine, whoever is in charge. They get up to roughly 5th fastest, occasionally maybe even 4th, and they go, now we've got to push on, and it just doesn't happen. And I feel like that's basically kind of this year.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And it's looking like a bit of a mess behind the scenes as well with the whole engine supplier.
I was going to ask,
constructor stuff.
Is it ever not a mess behind the scenes at Alpine? But yeah, I was gonna. Well, there's 2 big stories that have kind of come from the behind the scenes of Renault, whilst they've been playing like spin the bottle, who gets fired next. It's
well, the entire engine department.
Literally, they've been working towards this 2026 engine, and I did a video on Alpine at the beginning of the season, like, what can they actually do to improve this year? And I was like, not a lot. There's not too much they can really do because their engine is such a big problem. And they even said it themselves. They were like, we kind of aren't going to be anywhere that we want to be in this regulation cycle. But come 2026, lads, we've already started this engine. It's going to be great. And like, and then we get 10 races into the season, and they're like, you know, that engine that we said was going to be absolutely amazing. Yeah, we just quit. we're just not going to do that. Like, actually, we're going to have a Honda engine because I think if they pull out and they're not an engine supplier, Honda, because they're the most recent engine supplier to join the grid, would be forced to give engines to
Yeah.
Renault. So they're going to have a Honda engine supplier from a Honda team that really don't want to give them engines.
Is that genuinely how it works? At the most recent, it
Yeah.
doesn't go to
The
how
most
many
recent person
is
to join the grid is.
supplying.
Oh. No.
Because I thought that
Yeah,
was how it was before, where it had to be who supplied by what. But no, I get what you mean. It's like they have a board meeting. They'll be like, "Oh, how's the new engine going?" And it's like, "Oh, great. Should I show you it?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, sure." Rolls out a little red Twizy or something. Is that not an electric car actually? A Renault Twizy? You know what I mean, though. Like a Renault Clio just rolled out, like ta-da! I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, it just adds. You know 100% that'd be an amazing Drive to Survive episode.
Yeah.
I feel like Alpine being Alpine, they wouldn't allow that though for some reason. I feel like they'd be like, no, we can't compromise our
Yeah.
status.
Yeah, we can't be seen to look like stupid. That would we can't possibly, as Alpine Renault, do something that would be seen by the public and cause a ruckus. That'd be insane. Like, I don't know. They're just, well, second thing, engines falling apart. They've decided to cancel that. Just that really good engine they were working on.
Have they
cancelled.
decided it is being cancelled?
They're very close to being like, no. Which is then like really strange because the Alpine French team that is like Renault backed, the engine department is in France. If they get rid of that, that's the part of the French team that is in France. So the French Formula One team will have a base in the UK and have no connection to any French part apart from the name. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Just seems
isn't that like
mental.
Visa Cash App now? Oh, they're no longer Alpha Tauri Italian kind of thing.
But they haven't got the Italian name anymore, have they?
Yeah. But what was it? I was gonna say Alpine's 2026 engine construction is like, do you know the episode of James Acaster on Great British Bake Off? Other cooking shows are available to watch. Where he's like, started making it, had a breakdown, bon appetit. That's them with their engine. Started making it, had a breakdown. There you go.
Here's the Honda power unit. One that somebody else made and I got from the shop.
Simpsons meme where it's like, why doesn't mine look like that? Yeah, no, it does kind of sum up Alpine, and I feel like it already feels a little bit like this year's a bit of a write-off. Next year's kind of a bit of a write-off as well. And they just kind of need to regroup and be like, what do we do for 2026? Yeah. Which they haven't got figured out. I would honestly say, to be honest, I'd make the argument, actually, when I look at them, that they're the least, like, have it together on the grid.
Yeah.
Because even the other candidate in my head was, like, a Haas. But then I was like, they got rid of Gunter. They seem to be generally in some kind of pathway. The other one was then kicks out, but I'm like, well, they're becoming Audi. Yeah. So that kind of, they know what they're doing. Williams seem to have figured out the direction they want to head in. And then it's just Alpine who are like,
literally no idea what's happening. No idea. Well,
what is Formula One? Let's try endurance racing and suck at that too.
The fact that again, both Alpine engines, they decide to enter the 24-hour of Le Mans, like the biggest endurance race of the season, and both engines blow up. It's just like, what are you doing, lads? What is happening? What is going on?
You're gonna have to rename this video, right? Instead of it being like reacting to the Spanish Grand Prix, it's got to be like the roast of Alpine.
It's just ridiculous. And then obviously, well, the other Alpine news: Flavio Briatore, he's back.
Oh gosh,
you seen that? You seen that? Like,
I did.
It just seems like they finally have fired everybody, and they've replaced them, and then they're like, you know, that guy who is behind literally the most controversial moment, scandal, possibly in Formula One history, like the most controversial crash there has ever been.
I have an interesting question for you once you finish this.
And then they're like, you know who'd be great to get back on the board? That guy. Like, what? Who at Alpine made that decision? Who on earth at Alpine made that decision? Like, it just seems bizarre to bring in Flavio.
Yeah, it's just a bit of a mess. But the question I was going to ask this, because this was something that I saw, and it just, I don't completely agree, but it made me think, was Perez
Mhm.
being told in Canada to keep driving so as to not cause a safety car
Ooh,
isn't
yeah.
too dissimilar to the 2008 Crashgate kind of thing, in the sense if they've gone, we need you to cause a safety car, please crash. So
Yeah.
as in do something illegal you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
In the same vein, it's like, Perez, you really should retire the car here, but we don't want a safety car to compromise Max's race. So please
Yeah.
drive back to the pits. And again, I'm not saying they are the same,
No.
because they're not. One is completely predetermined and thought about, and the other is just a spur of the moment. Oh, let's try and avoid a safety car kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very different. But it did make me think. I was like, you know what? I think they've got a small point here. And it just made me kind of think. And now you mentioned Flavio in 2008, and, you know, everything.
I mean, Felipe
So,
Massa is still in court about that. Like, he's
yeah.
still now.
Has he settled on the fact that it's like he's just going for damages now, or is he
Yeah,
still
he's just
going
going
for the
for
actual?
pure cash, which I think, fair
Yeah,
enough.
I think everyone knew that would happen at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like you say, like he's not trying to be the world champion. He's just like, if I was the Brazilian world champion, could you imagine the amount of extra sponsorship deals I would
Yeah.
have had, or
Yeah.
job, like TV stuff, whatever, etc. So
And whilst that is
yeah,
happening, and Flavio
it's all
is
Alpine's fault.
probably involved. Well, that's the thing. Flavio's probably involved in those court cases in one way or another. And Alpine are
Mhm.
like, get him back in, sign him back up to the team, get him in. It's just like, what on earth is happening? And it's such a shame because, as you said at the top of this, what we should be saying is double points finish for Alpine, really solid
Yeah.
race. Congratulations. But we can't say that. We can't even
Well done
congratulate
on
them on a great
now being the
race
fifth
without
fastest
going.
team after. Yeah.
It's just like that you can't have any positivity around Alpine because whenever there is half a thing that is positive, there is 5 things that are negative. And it's just like you have to sort out those first. Where it's just
It's kind of like if Alpine owned a farm and they'd be like, guys, we built a new stable, and it's like, yeah, but the barn's on fire. You
yeah,
know?
just insane to me, like how ridiculous it can all be. And then let's
Yeah.
round off. Obviously, we talked about Alpine. There's other teams that just finished outside the top 10, and there wasn't too much to say, I don't think, for sort of
No, it's really not
Haas,
much.
Stake Sauber, Williams. It was just kind of a bit of one of those races where like none of them ever looked like they were ever properly going to
Yeah.
be in and amongst the points. I suppose you could say
Couple
like
of moves here and there.
yeah, it was quite nice to see Joe a little bit higher up. Like the Stakes Sauber looked a little bit quicker, but again, it's one of those tracks they've always been a little bit better at.
I do have one point to make with
Hmm.
it, actually. I think in the terms of general teams, are you? Because I am slightly getting a little bit worried with Williams,
Yes.
because earlier on to start the year and at the end of last year, it was like, we're headed in the direction. We know what we're doing. We've made all of our changes. We can keep progressing.
Mhm.
And it just feels like they're not.
No.
And it happens more and more. Like this one really sums it up. Like qualified 19th, 20th. Albon, yeah, he had the mistake and went off in the gravel, but realistically, he was only ever going to finish. Where was he? I don't know. I can't remember where he was, but you're talking bottom 5
Yeah.
still, probably.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, and yes, Sargent's in the car. He's inevitably being replaced. But it just feels like in general that they're not making the progress they probably would like to, especially considering how at the back the other teams are
Mhm.
within that.
Yeah, I think the most disappointing thing for Williams was obviously they came into the season with a car that was a bit half baked. They had a really troublesome winter break, but now they've brought those upgrades that they were kind of hoping to bring to the car a little bit earlier on in the season. and it didn't seem to make any difference. Like they brought the upgrades,
Yeah.
they brought the upgrades to both cars as well, and it made no difference. And then there was, as you said, that moment where Albon went into the gravel. Was it like lap 60, 61 around that?
Near the
And
end.
he
Yeah.
literally came on the radio and was like, "What the hell has just happened?" Like he couldn't inside the car understand how he was turning and the car just didn't. You know, like, he was
Yeah.
literally went to attack the corner and the car just barreled off into the gravel. And the team were kind of like, "Oh no, everything's okay our side." And he was like, "No, the car just didn't turn." Like it was scary, if anything else. Like if that happens
Mm.
when he's barreling down the straight, DRS wide open, and the brake fails or something. I think he was literally like, "Is everything all right in the car? Because if it's not, I'm stopping because we're in 18th place and I'm not going to kill myself for
Yeah.
this."
Yeah. They have that little bit of sense of sort of going, and James Fowles has obviously said this a lot of that. He's like, we've got a lot of changes that needed to be made, and we're a bit behind schedule with this. We've only got the one chassis. We don't have any spares, etc. That kind of stuff. And you sort of go at first, okay, yeah, that's where they are. They're making changes, etc., etc. And it's kind of like, how long can you
Yeah.
stick with that like narrative?
How long can he get
If you like,
away with just saying it?
how long can you still be catching up to where you want to be? You know?
Mm. There is a lot of personnel changes though, like in the positive sense. Like we talk about personnel changes, and it always seems like we're talking about Alpine and like just firing
Alpine.
people. But actually, Williams are getting in quite a few people, and that's kind of normally a step in the right direction. Like Aston Martin did it when they kind of made their big step, right? They brought in a few people from Red Bull, a few people from Mercedes. They're now trying to get Adrian Newey in. Like you've got to get people in that have a little bit of experience from those teams a little bit higher up. I think if you're going to make that step,
Yeah.
and Williams are starting to do that. Like they accrued Pat Fry, they've taken James Vowles in, they've got a few more people kind of in the line to come through. And then I suppose the other thing is just replacing Logan Sargent, right? Because at the minute,
Yeah.
it's so difficult to tell because they do only have Alex Albon. And if Alex Albon has an off weekend, you can't
Yeah.
really tell. You know what I mean? Like Alex Albon, he could have a really good weekend or a really bad weekend, and it's difficult to really gauge because you haven't got that
Yeah.
teammate who is, similar. Like you can see
Mm.
Sergio Perez isn't delivering because he's in the same car as Max Verstappen, and it's very clear that there's a gap there. Whereas like with Alex Albon, he has no real yardstick
Yeah.
to kind of
Yeah.
judge him against, and like
Mm.
it's really tough to know where he's at inside of that car as well. Who do you think is going to end up at the Williams, by the way? We kind of talked about the driver market. I think that Williams seat is the weirdest one, just
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they really want like a big name. Like
They
James
want
Vowles obviously
Sainz.
came out and was like really bullish on getting Carlos Sainz in, but I don't know if
It's
that's
tricky. It's really tricky. I feel like the longer it goes on, the less keen he would be to sign with them.
yeah
Reason being, if you're choosing between, and bless Carlos Sainz, he's gone from Ferrari to potentially Williams or Sauber.
yeah
But if you're choosing between the two, we know that he's got ties with Audi, and we know that he's got ties with all of that kind of direction. Why would you choose to go to Williams
Mhm.
when they're both at the back of the field? They're both not really performing. Why would you choose to go to Williams over the team that you have links and ties to? I do think Sainz is just holding out, hoping for that Mercedes seat. And but between those two with Williams, I just can't see him picking Williams over the Sauber if
no
they're if if they are still both at the back. If he talks with Williams and can see the direction they're going in, fine. But like race to race, they're roughly in the same place.
yeah
You know?
yeah.
There's no obvious difference.
Neither of
So
them
in
are
terms of who,
getting
yeah,
close to a top 10 at the
I
moment.
I could see Liam Lawson. I could see, especially because, like you said, they've done it with Albon, with the
Yeah.
Red Bull Junior going in, or the Red Bull affiliated driver. I could see it, and I feel like, how James Vowles is. I don't know. I feel it's one of those two.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
I think Williams would try and get Sainz, and if they can't get Sainz, the replacement is Lawson.
Yeah.
because Antonelli is up at Mercedes.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm assuming Antonelli is not an option.
Yeah.
I'm assuming
So
that's
what is it looking like then? Just as a drivers roundup, rookies next year, you should have Antonelli at Mercedes,
Mhm.
Doohan at Alpine.
Yeah.
Um, likely, I'm saying Antonelli Mercedes, Doohan Alpine, Behrman Haas, Lawson Williams.
Ooh, yeah. You don't think there's a slot for
Possibly
like
even.
Joe Guan Yu, Valtteri Bottas, or do you think one of those? Well, no, neither of them is going to stay at State Sauber. I was debating Joe Guan Yu to Alpine because obviously he was a junior there, or even Joe Guan Yu to Haas as well. Go in that direction.
The person that I'm amazed with how they've not ended up in F1, and it doesn't look like they're going to, is Teo Porcher.
He has had a heartbreak couple of seasons.
I don't understand, because it was like he was like a 17-year-old in F2 and came like third, and then like a year or two later he won it, and it's like he's got links to F1 teams, and it's like, no.
Yeah.
And I think it all comes back to the fact that they chose Joe. They chose Joe's money over Porcher, and he just seems to have never got the chance. He's still only.
Oh, he's 20, I think. But yeah, as you say, he came into F2 17, was quick off the bat, so quick as well.
Yeah, 20.
Had a link to a Sauber team where it felt like, okay, he's going to go into Sauber, probably alongside Bottas. You know, it'll be great fun for him. Then they picked Joe instead, and it was like, and then literally there's that interview where after the like coming into this year, he said like, oh well, Sauber told me, and the reason that he kind of stuck with Sauber was because they said to him, if you win the Formula 2 championship, we'll get you a Formula 1 seat. And then they didn't. And then he was picked up by the. Have you seen recently? He was picked up by McLaren in IndyCar after a really tough start to the season in Super Formula. Decided to move over to IndyCar, and now he's been dropped by McLaren's IndyCar team as well. So he's now just stuck with nothing again. Like he's just nowhere, and I feel really sorry for Teo Porcher.
Yeah, you do, especially because I think the difference is he's one of those guys that came through, and it's not like, feels a bit mean to say, but it's not like a Drugovic or a De Vries where they were never really looking like one of the quickest, and then won it on kind of the third or fourth try. And I think Porcher did actually win it on his third attempt.
It was the third attempt, but he was quick off the bat though.
But it was like it was the third attempt, but the others were like top 5 both times.
Yeah.
Like he was like always out there. And F2 can often be a bit of just how the luck goes at times. And so it just, I just don't know how, because I feel like every year for the past, whenever I've done who's my predictions in driver lineups, I'm like, Teo Porcher's fitting in somewhere.
Yeah.
And now it just looks like so unlikely that it's going to be anywhere. So he's my kind of like, just, I don't know. How we got onto this? Rookies.
Poor Teo Porcher.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting though. Like Joe Guan Yu, Valtteri Bottas, both available as well. There's still a lot of twists and turns to come in the.
Have they
market.
said that neither of them are staying?
They haven't said it, but I mean it's heavily implied, isn't it? Like they've already signed Nico Hulkenberg, and they really want Carlos Sainz. So
yeah, I could see them keeping one if they don't get signed.
Yeah. I suppose it depends which way they want to go. Would it be Joe Guan Yu kind of brings in the money? It also
depends whose choice it is. Like if you're Audi looking at it and you're like, well, we don't want the money necessarily.
Yeah, that's true.
Joe has been better though. Joe has been better. He's been like, as in he's not just money.
No,
he's never really been just money.
He's not a Latifi Mazepin level like money drop.
Not sure.
He's not a Canadian driver. He's proved his worth as Joe Guan Yu. Like that's why I kind of see him going somewhere else. I could see a Haas taking a dice roll or an Alpine taking a Joe Guan Yu as kind of like
he was a junior. He was an Alpine junior.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I feel like he's got the links there. He could end up going back there because he was kind of involved in the whole like Because it's the fact that Zhou Guanyu, Oscar Piastri, Fernando Alonso, and Esteban Ocon were their 4 drivers when they had that 2021 into 2022 season where they did really well. And then all 4 of them are now gone.
Yeah.
All 4 of them have left very quickly as well. They've all gone and they've all done fairly well. We don't know how Ocon's going to do elsewhere, but Fernando Alonso's picked up podiums, Oscar Piastri's picking up podiums, and Zhou Guanyu is, having a pretty good time at Stakes Albert. Is he doing better than the Alpines? Probably not, but you know what I mean. All of them have gone and proven themselves elsewhere, and I'm sure Esteban Ocon may end up getting a seat. An Alpine have just festered. It's turned into the absolute bottom of the barrel team, although not this weekend. So,
yeah,
kind of goes either way. That pretty much rounds it up. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions coming in, various bits and pieces.
I don't know if you heard that. Enzo's barking at something.
Oh, Enzo's not happy that it's coming to an end. I think we've pretty much covered everyone's questions that we had, and I'm going to leave it there. The Spanish Grand Prix. Max Verstappen takes it. Lando Norris. So close, yet so far. Another 19 points on the board, though. Thank you for joining me, mate. Thank you for coming on, getting involved. This is on track. Did I actually introduce it at the beginning? I don't know if I did. I feel like everyone who is subscribed to this channel should know you. It's one of those things.
Probably.
I feel like I know you so well. You don't need an introduction. There's no need for an introduction. But if you haven't, subscribe to On Track. He is him. Make some wonderful Formula 1 videos and some good videos with Enzo the dog. Great name. For a Formula 1
he's doing good.
dog.
He's getting good at predicting the F1. He's getting very good.
He's really narrowing it down. He's had 10 races to do it, to be fair. He's getting better and better and better. The season goes on. He's going to be when the World Cup has an octopus or a donkey or something along those lines that predicts the race. I feel like in a few years' time, that's going to be Enzo. He's going to get so good at predicting the races. We're going to actually go to him.
Going to get invited to races, and then before it, we just got to see which car he goes up to.
Just walk him up and down the paddock. A bit like, when Nico Rosberg used to stand in front of a garage and then that car would just do horrendously.
Yeah.
The opposite. Enzo will go in.
The funny thing is, the entire year, the only trend that I've definitely noticed, without looking at the numbers too much, Fernando Alonso has only been predicted in the top 10 once. For whatever reason, he's not a Fernando Alonso fan.
He just doesn't like Aston Martin. I mean, not many of us do like Aston Martin.
To be fair, more recently it does make sense to put them not in the top 10.
Oh yeah, definitely. They're very much moving away from top 10 territory in terms of their race pace in recent weekends. But thank you so much for joining me, mate. Thank everybody in the chat as well for joining us as well. Thank you guys for getting involved. And I'm back once again live for Austria. 4 live streams for that, because we've got sprint qualifying, the sprint race, the qualifying itself, and the Grand Prix. So make sure you subscribe to